Welcome to the Philosophical Odysseys podcast. Imagine a civilization that realizes life is nothing but meaningless, brutal suffering.
Right. Just an absolute terrifying void.
Exactly. And their response to that horrifying existential void is to invent a massive, drunken, chaotic dance party that accidentally births modern theater.
It's just the ultimate counterintuitive survival mechanism, you know? When staring into the abyss, most societies either invent a rigid religion to promise them a better afterlife, or they just collapse into nihilism.
Yeah.
But this specific culture chose to aggressively hallucinate a reality that made the suffering beautiful.
Which completely upends everything we think we know about the classical world. So welcome to a new deep dive. Today we are navigating an incredibly dense, absolutely fascinating lecture transcript about, well, one of the most provocative philosophical texts of the 19th century.
Oh, it is. It's explosive.
Yeah. And our mission today is to essentially tear down the neat, orderly museum exhibits in your mind and examine the raw, bleeding engine of human creativity. The core question we're going to obsess over today is, why do humans actually create art? Are we trying to build perfect, rational order to protect ourselves from a messy universe? Or are we desperately seeking a sanctioned, safe arena where we can completely lose our minds?
And that question forces us to examine a foundational tension between two deeply ancient, incredibly potent psychological drives. We aren't just doing a historical autopsy here, right?
No, not at all.
As the sources point out, this tension dictates how you consume media, how you interact with algorithms, how you survive your corporate job, and frankly, how modern states attempt to control their citizens right now.
Right. But to even begin decoding this, we have to look at the delivery mechanism, because the source material immediately flags that this philosopher's writing style is essentially an act of intellectual terrorism against the academy.
Yeah, he completely abandons the systematic architectural philosophy of his predecessors.
Right. You won't find the rigid scaffolding of Kant or Hegel here. Like, as you know, those thinkers built massive clockwork systems.
Oh, absolutely. Premise one locks into premise two, leading inextricably to a universal conclusion.
Oh, right.
It's a very comforting way to read philosophy because you feel like the author is holding your hand, walking you through a perfectly lit corridor of logic.
Yeah.
But our 19th century provocateur, he just smashes the lights and hands you a flashlight.
Yeah, he's throwing rhetorical bombs, aphorisms, dense metaphors, shifting personas. But I actually have a problem with that.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like, if your goal is to reveal a profound truth about human nature, why bury it in lyrical riddles? Why make the reader stumble around in the dark? It feels a bit arrogant.
Arrogant?
Yeah, like he's intentionally obfuscating his points just to weed out the people who aren't willing to work for it. So instead of building a neat architectural house of logic, he's basically throwing puzzle pieces at you and making you assemble them in the dark.
Well, I wouldn't call it arrogance, honestly. I'd call it a calculated psychological technique.
Okay, how so?
Think about how the human brain processes information. When you are spoon-fed a logical syllogism, you digest it passively. You nod, you agree, you forget it.
Right, it goes in one ear and out the other.
Exactly. But an aphorism, a sharp, incomplete poetic strike, it creates cognitive dissonance. It forces your brain to actively bridge the gap.
Oh, I see.
By refusing to give you the neat A leads to B textbook argument, he expects you to come prepared. It's an interactive thought pool. You aren't being fed answers, you're being provoked into thinking deeply about your own assumptions.
So the medium actually is the message. The chaos of his writing is demonstrating the exact philosophical point he's trying to make about human nature.
Spot on. He's bypassing the rational processing center of your brain and aiming straight for the gut.
Wow, okay, that makes sense. But it raises the question of why he felt this violent rejection of systematic logic was necessary. What pushed him to abandon the pristine halls of academia?
Especially considering he was a prodigy, right? Securing a professorship in classical philology at just 24 years old.
Which is insane.
Totally. To understand that, you just have to look out his window in the early 1870s.
Ah, right. The Franco-Prussian War. The aggressive unification of the Second German Empire under Bismarck.
Yes. We are talking about the birth of a militaristic, highly centralized industrial powerhouse. The state was rapidly expanding, optimizing, and calculating everything.
Right, the ultimate spreadsheet society.
Exactly. And our philosopher watched his peers, other academics, writers, thinkers, mistake this massive military and economic dominance for a cultural victory.
Oh, they assumed that because they had the best artillery and the most efficient bureaucracy, They must therefore have the most enlightened souls.
Which is a trap empires fall into all the time.
Yeah, it's the classic imperial delusion.
It is the eternal trap of the empire. He saw academic philosophy transforming into a mere administrative arm of the government.
A desk job.
Yes, exactly. When the academy's funding, prestige, and societal role are entirely dictated by the state, philosophy stops being a critical scalpel and becomes a rubber stamp. It exists only to logically legitimize whatever the empire wants to do.
Okay, but how exactly does a philosopher fight back against that without just getting executed or exiled? Because the source material brings up this brilliant historical parallel from ancient Rome, the story of Carneades.
Oh, the Carneades story is incredible.
Let's dig into the mechanics of what he actually did, because it perfectly illustrates the threat of genuine critical thought.
Sure. So Carneades arrives in Rome in 155 BC as a diplomatic envoy from Athens. Rome is rapidly expanding, conquering its neighbors, building its imperial narrative.
Right, they're feeling very good about themselves.
Very good. So on the first day, Carneades gives a public lecture defending Roman imperialism. And he doesn't just flatter them. He builds an ironclad, logically flawless argument.
Oh, wow.
He likely argues from the standpoint of natural law that the strong are ordained to rule the weak, that Rome brings necessary order, laws, and infrastructure to barbaric lands. The Roman elite, especially figures like Cato the Elder, are absolutely thrilled.
I mean, they think they've just hired the ancient equivalent of a superstar PR firm. They're probably thinking, finally, an intellectual who gets it.
Exactly. But then comes the second day.
There we go.
Carneades stands in front of the exact same crowd, and he deploys a completely different set of logical tools to systematically vaporize the argument he made the day before.
That is so bold.
It's wild. He argues that justice is merely an arbitrary social construct invented by the weak to protect themselves. He points out that Rome didn't acquire its empire through divine virtue, but through ruthless theft and subjugation.
Ouch!
Yeah. He proves that the concept of a just empire is a logical contradiction.
He weaponizes their own logic against them. Like, he shows them that reason isn't a magical compass pointing to absolute moral truth. It's just a tool that can be used to justify anything, including tyranny.
And that is terrifying to a state. Cato the Elder was so unnerved by this display that he demanded Carneades be banished from Rome immediately.
Just get him out of here.
Right. The empire cannot tolerate a mind that is not tethered to its ideological foundation. Our 19th century philosopher was trying to be the new Carneades. He was trying to shock a complacent, triumphant society into realizing that their rational optimism was a delusion.
Which resonates so heavily with recent history. Like, when I read this critique of state-sponsored optimism, I immediately think of the 1990s.
Oh, absolutely. The post-Cold War era?
Yeah, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet Union. We had prominent political scientists literally declaring the end of history.
Right, Fukuyama.
Exactly. There was this overwhelming, arrogant assumption that liberal democracy and free market capitalism were the final, perfected forms of human societal evolution. We thought we had permanently solved the human condition with an optimized formula.
We believed we had engineered away the tragedy of existence. But the underlying, messy, chaotic realities of human nature didn't disappear just because we built a better economic spreadsheet.
No, of course not.
The resentment, the tribalism, the primal anxieties, they were just bubbling beneath the surface, waiting to explode.
Which brings us to the metaphysical bedrock of the source material. If politics is largely a self-serving delusion, and if our technological and economic optimism is just a veneer, what is the actual reality of human existence?
To answer that, we have to look at the thinker who heavily influenced our subject, Arthur Schopenhauer. As you know, he's lifting directly from Schopenhauer's cosmic pessimism here, specifically the concept of the blind, striving will.
Right.
But his solution to that pessimism is entirely different.
Let's hover on that for a second, because Schopenhauer's version of pessimism is so much more brutal than just thinking life is unfair.
Well, it's bleak.
He argued that the fundamental fabric of the universe, the underlying reality behind everything we see, is this irrational, aimless energy he called the will.
Yes. It is a ceaseless, hungry striving. It has no ultimate goal, no divine plan, and no moral compass. It just wants to persist and consume.
Sounds exhausting.
It is. And because humans are manifestations of this will, our baseline state is endless, unfulfilled desire. When we lack something, we suffer from the pain of wanting it.
Right.
When we finally get it, we suffer from the crushing boredom of having it, which immediately generates a new desire. We are trapped on an eternal treadmill of suffering.
The sources refer to this realization as the horror of existence. It's the terrifying awareness of our own mortality combined with the realization that our daily striving is largely pointless.
Yeah.
But here is where our philosopher breaks away from Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer's solution to the horror of existence was essentially asceticism, right? To starve the will, to detach from desire, to turn away from the world, basically to meditate your way into nothingness.
A total withdrawal from life.
Right. But our philosopher looks at the ancient Greeks and sees an entirely different, much more defiant survival strategy. He introduces this concept of Greek joy.
Yes.
And we need to be really precise about this because when most people think of ancient Greece, they picture serene philosophers doing geometry in pristine white marble temples.
Right, the Enlightenment's fantasy of Greece, the neoclassic ideal.
Exactly. But the Greek joy he's talking about wasn't naive cheerfulness. It wasn't the blissful ignorance of someone who doesn't know how bad life is.
Quite the opposite. The Greeks possessed a devastatingly acute awareness of the horror of existence. The sources allude to the ancient Greek myth of King Midas hunting down the wise woodland spirit Silenus.
Right. This is a dark story.
Very. When Midas finally captures Silenus and asks him what the best and most desirable thing is for mankind, Silenus gives a deeply chilling answer. He says, the best of all things is something entirely outside your grasp, not to be born, not to be nothing. But the second best thing for you is to die soon.
God, that is as dark as it gets. That is the baseline cultural psychology we are dealing with.
So how does a culture built on that level of existential dread function? How do they avoid mass societal collapse?
Yeah, you'd think they would just give up.
The philosopher argues that they survived not by denying the horror, but by fundamentally transforming it. They took the terrifying, meaningless suffering of life and wrapped it in aesthetic beauty. They invented Greek tragedy to provide a metaphysical comfort. Art became the supreme justification for existence.
So think about your daily grind, the bare minimum of going to work, paying bills, fulfilling obligations. It feels like a trap. But the moment you create something or truly engage with art, you break out of that trap. I want to break down exactly how that psychological transformation works because it introduces the two most famous concepts from this entire text, the Apollonian and the Dionysian.
Yes, the core engine of the whole theory.
These are the two opposing biological and aesthetic drives that govern the human mind. Let's start by dissecting the Apollonian.
Sure. Named, of course, for Apollo, the god of the sun, of light, of prophecy, and of healing. The Apollonian drive represents boundaries, logic, measure, and what philosophy refers to as the principle of individuation.
Meaning the cognitive structures that allow me to perceive myself as an individual entity, separate from you, separate from the chair I'm sitting on.
Exactly. It's how our brains organize the chaotic sensory input of the universe into distinct, manageable objects situated in space and time. It is the drawing of lines.
Like putting the world into neat little boxes.
Exactly. Culturally, the Apollonian manifests in the plastic arts, sculpture, painting, grand architecture. Think of the Parthenon. It relies on perfect mathematical proportions, symmetry, and clear, distinct forms.
The text describes the Apollonian as existing in a state of traum, or dream. Why a dream?
Because a dream, in this context, is a beautiful illusion. When you look at a perfectly sculpted marble statue of a hero, you are looking at an idealized fiction. The Apollonian creates a protective veil over the horrifying reality of the Schopenhauerian will.
It's like a shield.
It gives us a sense of safety, predictability, and individual identity. We need the Apollonian illusion just to wake up in the morning and function in society.
So it's the urge to organize the chaos into a spreadsheet. But if we only had the Apollonian, life would be rigid, isolated, and ultimately terrifying because we'd be constantly aware of our fragile individuality and impending death.
Right.
Which necessitates the other half of the equation, the Dionysian.
Named for Dionysus, the god of wine, fertility, and ritual madness. If Apollo is the dream, Dionysus is intoxication, or rausch.
And we aren't just talking about having a few beers on a Friday night. We are talking about a physiological and psychological rupture.
Completely. The Dionysian drive represents the shattering of the principle of individuation. It is the moment those neurological boundaries collapse. Where the Apollonian draws lines, the Dionysian violently erases them.
Oh, wow.
In the Dionysian state, the individual ego dissolves entirely into the collective mass, into nature, into the primordial unity of existence. It is intrinsically tied to the non-visual arts, specifically the rhythmic, pulsing, overwhelming power of music and dance.
Let's visualize this mechanically, because the contrast in the sources is staggering. The Apollonian is the awe you feel when analyzing the structural integrity of a massive suspension bridge. You marvel at the calculus, the tensile strength of the steel cables, the triumph of human engineering over the chaotic forces of the river. It's glorious, it's triumphant, but it's completely rigid. You remain an observer.
You are separate from the bridge.
Right. But the Dionysian, that is the physiological rush of being in the center of a massive, thumping, deafening music festival in the middle of the night.
Oh, yeah.
The bass physically vibrates in your chest. Your heart rate syncs with the drums. The endorphins flood your system. In that peak moment of intoxication, you aren't thinking about your mortgage, your career trajectory, or your impending mortality.
No, all of that is gone.
The social hierarchies of boss and employee, rich and poor, completely evaporate. You literally lose yourself. You become a single, breathing organism with the crowd around a fire.
It is an ecstatic release valve. The Greeks instinctively understood a profound psychological truth. If human beings do not have a sanctioned, structured way to occasionally dissolve their egos and experience that terrifying, primordial chaos, the society will rip itself apart.
Yeah, we'd go crazy.
We need the Apollonian bridge to commute to work. But we need the Dionysian festival to survive the psychic weight of being alive.
Which sets up one of the most radical historical claims in the entire source material. How did the Greeks synthesize these two volatile, opposing forces to create the greatest art form of the ancient world?
Fascinating.
Let's look at the true birth of tragedy, because it didn't start with polite actors reading scripts on a wooden stage.
Not at all. The origins of tragedy are completely wrapped up in the cults of Dionysus. It began with the Dithram, a wild, ecstatic choral hymn sung and danced by worshippers possessed by the god. It originated entirely from the chorus.
Right.
And crucially, the earliest choruses were composed of men dressed as satyrs.
So, half human, half goat creatures. But he doesn't look at the satyr as just a cute mythological trope. He views the satyr as the raw, unfiltered truth of untamed nature.
We really have to strip away our modern, sanitized view of nature to understand this. For an ancient Greek, walking into a dense, unmapped forest was a genuinely terrifying prospect. Nature wasn't a manicured state park.
No, you might not come out.
Exactly. It was a zone of lethal chaos, full of predators, unpredictable weather, and raw brutality. The satyr embodies that terrifying reality. The satyr operates entirely outside the boundaries of polite society's rules and Apollonian logic.
So the very first theatrical performances were essentially groups of people retreating from the organized city, dressing as beasts, and engaging in a collective, rhythmic, primal scream to purge their existential dread.
Yeah.
They were tapping into the terror and ecstasy of existence.
Exactly. It was pure Dionysian energy. But pure Dionysian energy is radioactive. It's too dangerous to sustain. If you stay in that state of intoxicated frenzy forever, you die in the woods.
So how did it become theater? I mean, tragedy is a very structured art form.
This is the miraculous synthesis. Slowly, the Apollonian drive stepped in to contain the radioactive material. The wild, screaming chorus was brought out of the woods and placed into a structured amphitheater.
Okay.
Dialogue was introduced. The mythic suffering of Dionysus was projected onto a specific, relatable hero on a stage. The primal scream was translated into beautiful, poetic, measured verses.
Oh, I see. It evolved like growing up. It started as an unscripted primal release, but slowly it became mathematically calculated. The raw emotion was trapped inside Apollonian rules.
Yes.
So the stage acts as a protective lead shield. The audience gets to experience the devastating, chaotic, Dionysian truth of human suffering. They watch Oedipus realize he has committed unspeakable horrors. They feel the crushing weight of fate, but they're protected by the Apollonian illusion of the performance. They don't actually have to blind themselves. They can absorb the catharsis safely.
It is the perfect marriage of the two drives. The Dionysian provides the profound, terrifying emotional truth, and the Apollonian provides the beautiful, visible structure that makes the truth bearable to look at.
Okay, but this raises a massive red flag for me. If tragedy achieved this perfect, delicate psychological balance, why did it disappear? What broke the synthesis?
Our philosopher operates like a detective here, and he points the finger at two specific assassins who murdered tragedy: the philosopher Socrates and the playwright Euripides.
The heavyweights. But wait, I have to push back here.
Go for it.
Socrates is the founding father of Western logic. Euripides wrote some of the most psychologically complex plays in history. Why is injecting logic and psychological realism into art a bad thing?
Whoa.
Like, if I'm watching a play, I want to understand why a character's doing something. I want their motivations to make sense. Why is making art logical crime?
Because you are assuming that the purpose of art is to be understood by the intellect. This philosopher argues that true, life-saving art must communicate with the primal unconscious drives. Socrates introduced a devastating new equation to the ancient world. He equated virtue strictly with knowledge. To be good, one must be rational. Socrates had that famous internal demon, but what did it do? It only ever spoke up to tell him what not to do.
Interesting.
Socratic logic is purely analytical. It is a critical dissecting tool, not a creative engine.
So Euripides takes this Socratic obsession with logic and applies it to the theater.
Exactly. This leads to what the text calls aesthetic Socratism, the fatal premise that for something to be beautiful, it must be entirely intelligible.
It has to make perfect sense.
Right. Before Euripides, tragedy was steeped in mythic awe. Characters faced incomprehensible divine fates. The chorus represented the vast, mysterious forces of the universe.
But Euripides brings the common man onto the stage. He shrinks the universe down to the size of a living room dispute.
He brings a spectator onto the stage. He strips away the mythic distance. Suddenly, if a character is going to take an action, they have to stand there and deliver a long, calculating, rational speech explaining their precise psychological and logical motivations.
So no more mystery.
None. He wanted everything explained. He wanted to solve the mystery of human behavior.
Okay, the Lost TV show analogy from the sources is the absolute perfect way to explain the mechanics of why this ruins the art.
I love this analogy.
Think about the early seasons of Lost. You have a smoke monster, a mysterious hatch whispers in the jungle. The characters are terrified and completely bewildered, and so is the audience.
Yeah, nobody knows what's going on.
Because the show leaves the mystery unexplained, your imagination is forced to do the heavy lifting. You project your own deepest anxieties into that unknown space. It creates a mythical, lasting, almost Dionysian sense of awe.
It engages the unconscious mind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then, what do the writers do in the later seasons? They try to mathematically explain the magic. They introduce pseudoscientific electromagnetic fields, time travel equations, and literal glowing light caves to logically justify every single mystery.
And what happens?
The moment they mathematically explain the smoke monster, the magic completely evaporates. The awe dies. It just becomes a convoluted science textbook. That is exactly what Euripides did to Greek theater.
He over-explained the smoke monster. That's brilliant. When you make the mystery too relatable, you lose the high-stakes divine ecstasy. When you reduce divine chaotic fate to a simple equation of cause and effect, you suffocate the Dionysian element.
Rationality killed the awe.
It really did. Euripides replaced the intoxicating power of music and myth with the dry, calculating power of dialectics.
It's the arrogant belief that the human intellect can map everything, solve everything, and cure the human condition through sheer processing power. And our philosopher didn't just see this happening in ancient Greece, he saw it dominating his own 19th century culture.
And we are absolutely drowning in it today.
Which brings us to the modern echoes. I want to pull this exact ancient tension, the wild, unpredictable Dionysian passion versus the calculating, spreadsheet-driven Apollonian logic, and trace how it is actively dictating the media we consume right now in our living rooms and Spotify playlists.
It's everywhere.
Let's start with the music industry, because the mechanics here are fascinating.
Think about the origins of rock and roll, or the blues, or think about the deeply improvised, chaotic live performances of someone like Eric Clapton or Frank Zappa. What is actually happening in those moments?
The passion.
You are witnessing pure Dionysian energy. It's a musician tapping into a raw, unpredictable stream of consciousness, improvising notes in real time. It's a primal scream channeled through an amplifier. The artist themselves doesn't fully know what note they're going to play next.
It's dangerous. It's thrilling. But then the Apollonian forces the record executives, the producers, the data analysts step into the room.
And what do they say? This raw energy is great, but it's not scalable. We need to mitigate the risk. How do we guarantee 1 million streams?
Oh,
No, so they impose mathematical formulas. They discover that the human brain statistically responds best to a song that is exactly 3 minutes and 10 seconds long. They calculate that the hook must hit within the first 11 seconds to prevent skips on Spotify.
They use focus groups to determine the exact chord progressions that yield the highest expected emotional response across the widest demographic.
Exactly. They algorithmically optimize the magic completely out of the art.
They produce a flawlessly structured, perfectly auto-tuned, hyper-compressed pop track. It is peak Apollonian architecture.
But the Dionysian spark, the dangerous, unpredictable soul of the music, has been completely stifled by the rules. What began as a wild satyr chorus in the woods ends up as a focus-grouped product designed to play in the background of a retail store.
I see this exact same trajectory in the sports world. The sources bring up tennis and basketball, and the parallels are stunning.
It's the exact same battle between aesthetic beauty and calculating logic.
Right. Take Roger Federer's one-handed backhand, or Michael Jordan's mid-range fadeaway. When you watch those movements, you are watching physical artistry.
Yeah, it's poetry in motion.
It feels inspired, graceful, almost Dionysian in its defiance of gravity. It's breathtaking to witness. But as the sports evolve, the Apollonian analytics departments take over.
The data scientists run the expected value calculations.
Right. And the math proves that a two-handed backhand is statistically more reliable. In the NBA, the math proves that shooting a massive volume of three-pointers and layups is mathematically far more efficient than shooting a beautiful mid-range jumper.
So the game fundamentally changes.
It becomes a heavily calculated, predictable system of optimizing expected value. The teams win more efficiently, but the game loses that spontaneous aesthetic flash of genius. The logic kills the awe, just like Euripides.
You are watching the triumph of the Apollonian grid over the Dionysian flow. But, there are still arenas where the Dionysian fights back. The source highlights stand-up comedy as a prime example.
Because stand-up is inherently dangerous.
Exactly. A comedian walks on stage with a heavily rehearsed, meticulously timed monologue. They know exactly where the pauses are. They've calculated the syllables to maximize the punchline.
Highly Apollonian.
That is a highly Apollonian construction. But then a heckler interrupts from the back of the room.
The chaos enters the system. The spreadsheet is broken.
The script is entirely shattered. In that exact second, the comedian must drop the Apollonian structure and instantly tap into the Dionysian. They have to ride the unpredictable, volatile energy of the crowd and brilliantly improvise a comeback in real time.
That's where the magic happens.
That sheer friction, the collision between the rehearsed structure and the wild, unscripted chaos is where the true electricity of live comedy lives. It cannot be mathematically modeled.
I love that. And it perfectly explains another phenomenon the sources brought up, which blew my mind. Why are Mediterranean and Turkish soap operas absolutely massive globally right now?
Oh, this is such a great point.
Why is a viewer in a highly structured society like Sweden or Japan absolutely obsessed with these shows?
It is a profound cultural rebellion. The expert in the source explains that these shows resonate specifically because they violently reject Northern European Apollonian Stoic logic.
They do not care about restraint.
Not at all. They lean entirely into intense, taboo-breaking, Dionysian emotional chaos. The characters do not sit in a minimalist apartment and have a quiet, rational, heavily mediated conversation about their feelings.
No, they scream, they shatter glass, they betray their families, they act on raw, unpredictable, destructive passion.
They operate on the exact kind of irrational, messy, human drama that the ancient Greeks put on their stages before Socrates ruined it.
Exactly. Modern viewers are suffocating under the weight of their Apollonian lives, the emails, the schedules, the metrics, the HR guidelines. When they sit down and binge a chaotic soap opera, they are participating in a simulated Dionysian ritual.
They are seeking an emotional release valve from the crushing demands of continuous rationality.
Okay, but this leads us to the darkest and most critical part of this deep dive. We've been talking about this tension primarily in terms of art, sports, and entertainment. But what happens in the real world when this obsessive drive for absolute rational order bleeds out of the theater and into the government?
It gets incredibly dangerous.
What happens to a society when the Apollonian drive to calculate and perfect completely eradicates the Dionysian messiness of humanity?
The results are historically catastrophic. When you believe that society is merely an engineering problem to be solved with absolute logic, you inevitably end up with totalitarianism.
Because totalitarianism is essentially the Apollonian drive gone toxic. It's the ultimate spreadsheet.
Precisely. A totalitarian regime operates on the premise that it possesses the final, rational blueprint for human perfection. To maintain that blueprint, the state must relentlessly eliminate any variable it cannot predict or control.
It has to control everything.
It must mandate what is beautiful, what is rational, what is permitted. And the one thing a rigid system cannot tolerate is the Dionysian, because the Dionysian is inherently unpredictable. It proves that human beings are not cogs that can be perfectly programmed.
And the sources provide a chilling, incredibly specific historical anecdote to illustrate the mechanics of this terror. It's set in 1958, recounting an event from the height of Nazi Germany. Let's walk through this, because it powerfully proves that extreme order is terrified of a simple joke.
Yeah, it's a sobering story. There is a comedian performing in a cabaret in Nazi Germany. During his set, he tells a very simple, almost throwaway joke. He mentions an empty Mercedes driving by on the street, and he notes, rather casually, that it lacked its SS officers.
It's not a grand political manifesto. It's just a tiny, fleeting moment of absurdity, just pointing out the temporary absence of the terrifying authority figures.
But that tiny moment of absurdity is a Dionysian spark. Humor is fundamentally unpredictable. It relies on subverting expectations and breaking established rules.
Right.
A totalitarian regime cannot calculate a joke. It cannot control a spontaneous laugh from a crowd, because that laughter represents a momentary dissolution of the state's rigid authority.
And the response from the state was absolute destruction. The anecdote notes that for that one simple, unscripted passing joke, the comedian was sent to a concentration camp.
It is a horrifying reality, but it violently proves the philosopher's core thesis. Extreme, unchecked rationalism is utterly terrified of improvisation. It's terrified of the satyr.
Wow.
The state wanted a perfectly scripted, logically flawless tragedy, and they were willing to massacre the chorus to achieve it. When you worship logic in order to the total exclusion of messy human passion, you don't get a utopia, you get a slaughterhouse.
Which brings us to the final takeaways of this entire Odyssey. Because we've traversed from the origins of ancient Greek theater, to the algorithms destroying modern pop music, to the chilling realities of totalitarian states. And the thread connecting all of it is the desperate need for delicate friction.
The ideal state, whether we're talking about a functioning political system, a piece of art that moves the soul, or just a healthy human mind, is found strictly in the tension between the Apollonian and the Dionysian. It is not about choosing one over the other.
If we only have the Dionysian, we dissolve into pure chaos and madness.
Yes. But if we only have the Apollonian, we become rigid, joyless machines marching toward our own spiritual death. We need the Apollonian structure, the bridges, the laws, the rhythm, the boundaries to keep us from falling apart.
But we desperately need the chaotic passion, the intoxication, the music, the unpredictable fire of the Dionysian to make that structured life actually worth living.
Without it, what's the point?
So before we sign off, I want to turn the lens on you, the listener. Look at your own life. Are you overscripting your days like a rationalist playwright, obsessing over logic and order? Or are you leaving room for the unpredictable, wild chorus of your own nature? Sometimes you just need to let the music take over.
That's right.
And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. Think about the rise of artificial intelligence. AI is the ultimate perfected Apollonian engine. It can organize data, calculate probabilities, and mimic logical structures faster and more flawlessly than any human brain ever could.
It is the absolute peak of the spreadsheet.
If AI can perfectly master the Apollonian realm, will the only true, irreplaceable human art left in the future be the messy, erroneous, utterly unpredictable Dionysian creations that a machine could never calculate?
Will our flaws become our only proof of humanity? It is a terrifying and beautiful question.
Something to heavily chew on this week as you navigate your own balance between the spreadsheet and the primal scream. Don't forget to follow us and subscribe to stay updated on our latest episodes and never miss a step in this odyssey of thought. Until next time, keep questioning.